It was 7:32 p.m. on Friday, November 18th, 1955, when Robert Bobby Smooth Jackson, 44, sat across from his best friend of 22 years, Bumpy Johnson, at a private table in the Red Rooster restaurant on Lenox Avenue, raised his wine glass, and said the words that would haunt him for the final 48 hours of his life. To friendship, to loyalty, to 22 years together. Bumpy Johnson, 50, smiled and raised his own glass, the glass that Jackson had poisoned with 15 milligrams of arsenic trioxide just 90 seconds earlier, while Bumpy was greeting other guests. According to 4 witnesses present at the dinner and who spoke with the Harlem Gazette between November 20th and November 24th, 1955, the celebration was supposed to honor the opening of a new legitimate business, a jazz club that Johnson and Jackson had invested in together. 50 guests attended, music played, food was served, wine flowed, and in the middle of it all, Bumpy Johnson's closest friend, the man he'd trusted for over 2 decades, the man he'd made rich through their partnership, was trying to murder him. The arsenic was supposed to kill Bumpy within 12 hours. Slow poisoning symptoms would seem like food poisoning or natural illness. By the time anyone suspected foul play, Jackson would have a perfect alibi. He'd been at the same dinner, eaten the same food, drunk the same wine. How could he be the poisoner? But Jackson made a critical miscalculation. He assumed Bumpy would drink the entire glass immediately. Instead, Bumpy took one sip, set the glass down, and spent the next 30 minutes talking to guests before taking another sip. That delay, that single 30-minute delay, gave Bumpy's body time to process the poison slowly, time to build symptoms gradually, time for Bumpy to realize something was wrong before the poison became lethal. And, most importantly, it gave Bumpy time to figure out who had poisoned him. What happened over the next 48 hours? According to 11 witnesses who spoke to various publications between November 20th and December 5th, 1955 became the most infamous revenge killing in Harlem's criminal history. Bobby Jackson had poisoned his best friend for $50,000. Bumpy Johnson made sure Jackson spent his final hours wishing he'd never been born. Bumpy Johnson excused himself from the table at 9:15 p.m., telling guests he needed fresh air. According to Theodore Green, his attorney who was present, Bumpy looked pale and was sweating despite the cool November evening. "You all right, boss?" William Bub Houellette asked. "Something's wrong," Bumpy replied quietly. "I feel wrong. Not food poisoning. Something else." Bumpy Johnson had survived multiple assassination attempts in his 50 years. He knew the difference between illness and poison. His instincts, honed through decades of surviving in the criminal underworld, told him he'd been poisoned. But who? And when? In the restaurant's back office, Bumpy forced himself to vomit, trying to expel whatever poison was in his system. The vomiting helped. His symptoms stabilized. He wasn't going to die tonight. But someone had tried to kill him. Someone at that dinner. Someone he trusted enough to let them get close. Theodore Green later told the Gazette. Bumpy sat in that office for 20 minutes, going through everyone at the dinner in his mind. Who had opportunity? Who had motive? Who stood to gain from his death? Then Bumpy asked the question that solved the mystery. Who poured my wine tonight? Green thought back. Bobby did. He poured both your glasses when you were greeting the mayor. The room went silent. Bobby Jackson, best friend for 22 years, business partner, the man Bumpy trusted more than almost anyone. "Get me Dr. Richardson," Bumpy said quietly, "and don't let Bobby leave the restaurant." Dr. Samuel Richardson, who'd treated Bumpy after the 36 stab wounds in 1947, arrived at 10:30 p.m. and examined Bumpy in the back office. "Your pupils are constricted. You're sweating but cold. Nausea, vomiting. How much wine did you drink?" 3 sips, maybe 4 ounces total. Dr. Richardson's face darkened. This looks like arsenic poisoning. If you'd finished that glass, you'd be dead by morning. Who poured your wine? My best friend, Bumpy replied, his voice cold. My best friend tried to kill me. Bumpy returned to the main dining room at 11 p.m., looking recovered, smiling, acting as if nothing was wrong. The party was winding down. Guests were leaving. Bobby Jackson stood near the exit, putting on his coat, preparing to leave. Bobby, Bumpy called out cheerfully. Stay for one more drink. Just you and me. Like old times. Jackson hesitated. Something in Bumpy's tone made him nervous, but he couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. Sure, Bump. One more for the road. They sat back down at the now empty head table. Bumpy poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a fresh bottle. 22 years, Bobby. 22 years we've been friends. You remember when we met? 1,933. You were a nobody. I made you somebody. Made you rich. Made you respected. I remember, Bump. Best thing that ever happened to me. So why? Bumpy asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Did you put arsenic in my wine at 7:32 tonight? Jackson's face went white. He started to stand. Bumpy grabbed his wrist with crushing force. Sit down. 4 men appeared from the shadows, Hewlett and 3 associates. The restaurant was empty now except for them. Jackson realized he was trapped. Bumpy returned to the main dining room at 11 p.m., looking recovered, smiling, acting as if nothing was wrong. The party was winding down. Guests were leaving. Bobby Jackson stood near the exit, putting on his coat, preparing to leave. Bobby, Bumpy called out cheerfully. Stay for one more drink. Just you and me. Like old times. Jackson hesitated. Something in Bumpy's tone made him nervous, but he couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. Sure, Bump. One more for the road. They sat back down at the now empty head table. Bumpy poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a fresh bottle. 22 years, Bobby. 22 years we've been friends. You remember when we met? 1,933. You were a nobody. I made you somebody. Made you rich. Made you respected. I remember, Bump. Best thing that ever happened to me. So why? Bumpy asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Did you put arsenic in my wine at 7:32 tonight? Jackson's face went white. He started to stand. Bumpy grabbed his wrist with crushing force. Sit down. 4 men appeared from the shadows, Hewlett and 3 associates. The restaurant was empty now except for them. Jackson realized he was trapped. In the back office, with nowhere to run and no way to lie his way out. Bobby Jackson confessed everything. The Genovese family had approached him 6 months ago. They wanted Bumpy dead. They'd tried hiring hitmen, failed. They'd tried ambushes, failed. They'd tried turning other people, failed. So they decided to turn Bumpy's best friend. They offered me $50,000, Jackson sobbed. $50,000 to put poison in your drink. They said you'd never suspect me. Said I'd be rich and you'd be dead, and everyone would think it was natural causes. And you took the deal, Bumpy said, his voice emotionless. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They threatened my family. They said if I didn't do it, they'd kill my sister. Shut up, Bumpy interrupted. You did it for money. Don't insult me with lies about threats. You did it because $50,000 was worth more to you than 22 years of friendship. Jackson couldn't respond. Just cried. Here's what's going to happen, Bobby. You're going to spend the next 48 hours learning what happens to people who betray me. And when those 48 hours are over, you're going to beg me to let you die. But I won't. Not until you've suffered enough. At 12:45 a.m. on November 19th, Bobby Jackson was taken to a warehouse on 145th Street that Johnson's organization used for special purposes. What happened to Jackson over the next 48 hours was never fully disclosed. But according to three people who were present at various times, Hewlett, Theodore Green, and one associate who spoke anonymously, Bumpy Johnson personally supervised Jackson's punishment. Bumpy didn't kill Bobby right away. Hewlett told the Gazette years later. He wanted Bobby to experience something worse than death. Wanted him to understand, really understand what he'd done. Wanted him to feel every consequence of his betrayal. Bumpy didn't touch Jackson for the first 12 hours. Just talked to him. Reminded him of everything they'd been through together. Remember 1937, Bobby? When you were arrested for that robbery? Who bailed you out? Who paid for your lawyer? Who made sure the charges got dropped? Jackson, tied to a chair, could only nod. Remember 1942, when your mother got sick? Who paid for her medical care? Who made sure she got the best doctors in Harlem? Who held your hand at her funeral? You did, Bump. You did all that. And how did you repay me? Poison in my wine. At a celebration. In front of 50 people. Hour after hour. Bumpy recounted every kindness, every favor, every time he'd protected Jackson, making Jackson confront the full weight of his betrayal. By hour 10, Bobby was crying so hard he could barely breathe, Hewlett recalled. The guilt was destroying him worse than any physical torture could. At hour 12, Bumpy produced a bottle the same arsenic trioxide Jackson had used. You gave me poison, Bobby. Seems fair. I returned the favor. But Bumpy didn't give Jackson a lethal dose. He gave him just enough to make him violently sick, vomiting, cramping, burning pain, but not enough to kill. You wanted me to die slowly from poison? Now you know what it feels like. Except you're going to survive this. Because we're not even halfway done. The details of what happened during hours 24 to 36 were considered too graphic for the Gazette to publish. They reported only that Jackson sustained injuries consistent with systematic torture designed to cause maximum pain without causing death. Multiple broken fingers. Burns. Cuts. Each administered slowly, methodically, with Bumpy watching and occasionally asking, "Was $50,000 worth this, Bobby?" By hour 36, Bobby Jackson was begging to die. Literally. Begging. Offering anything, money, information, his own life, just to make it stop. Please, Bump. Please just kill me. I can't take any more. Please. Not yet, Bumpy replied calmly. You haven't suffered enough yet. The final 12 hours, according to all witnesses, involved Bumpy forcing Jackson to write a full confession, naming the Genovese family members who'd hired him, detailing the entire plot, admitting his betrayal in his own handwriting. This confession is going to make sure the Genovese family knows you failed, Bumpy told Jackson. And that you told me everything. So even if you somehow survive this, they'll kill you for being a snitch. You're dead either way, Bobby. I'm just making sure you die knowing you destroyed yourself for nothing. At exactly 12:45 a.m., on November 21st, 1955, precisely 48 hours after Jackson was brought to the warehouse, Bumpy Johnson finally granted Bobby Jackson's wish. Jackson's body was found at 6:30 a.m. in an alley behind 145th Street. The coroner's report, obtained through public records, listed cause of death as multiple traumatic injuries, consistent with torture followed by asphyxiation. But there was one additional detail that made the crime scene investigators pause. Carved into Jackson's chest, visible and deliberate, were 3 words: poisoned his friend. The message was clear. This man betrayed his best friend. This is what happens to betrayers. Frank Costello, speaking for the Genovese family, called Theodore Green on November 22, 1955. We had nothing to do with Bobby Jackson's plot. Costello claimed, according to Green's testimony. That was his own greed. We never authorized it. Bumpy Johnson didn't believe it. But he also knew he couldn't go to war with the Genovese family over one betrayer. Instead, he sent a message. Bobby Jackson's confession, delivered to Costello's office, with a note. Next time you try to kill me, do it yourself. Don't use my friends. There was no next time. The Genovese family never tried to kill Bumpy Johnson again. After Bobby Jackson, nobody in Harlem ever felt completely safe, says Dr. Marcus Thompson. If Bumpy's best friend of 22 years could betray him and end up tortured to death, then anyone could. It created a culture of paranoia that actually strengthened Bumpy's control. Everyone was terrified of being suspected of betrayal. Before November 1955, people believed that Bumpy Johnson valued loyalty above all else, that if you were truly loyal to him, he'd protect you forever. After Bobby Jackson, people learned a darker truth. Bumpy Johnson valued loyalty so highly that betraying it resulted in punishments worse than death. The closer you were to Bumpy, the more severe your punishment if you betrayed him. Bobby Jackson was Bumpy's best friend, Hewlett reflected years later. And Bumpy made him suffer more than any enemy ever suffered. Because betrayal from a friend hurts worse than betrayal from an enemy. And Bumpy made sure Bobby felt every bit of that pain before he died. Today, criminal psychologists study the Bobby Jackson case as an example of disproportionate revenge punishment, so severe it goes beyond justice into psychological warfare. Bumpy Johnson could have killed Bobby Jackson immediately, explains Dr. Jennifer Walsh, forensic psychologist. Instead, he kept him alive for 48 hours of agony. That wasn't about punishment. That was about sending a message so powerful that it would prevent any future betrayals. And it worked. For the remaining 13 years of Bumpy's life, no one close to him ever betrayed him again. November 18th, 1955, was supposed to be a celebration, a toast to friendship and success. Instead, it became the night Bobby Jackson poisoned his best friend for $50,000. And the next 48 hours became a lesson in what happens when you trade 22 years of friendship for money, when you betray the one person who made you everything you are, when you put poison in the wineglass of someone who trusted you completely. Bobby Jackson died at 12:45 a.m. on November 21st, 1955, in a warehouse on 145th Street. But he stopped being human long before that, around hour 36, when he begged for death and Bumpy refused. The $50,000 the Genovese family had promised never paid. Jackson died broke and broken, having destroyed himself for money he never received. The carved words on his chest, "Poisoned his friend," remained visible when his body was found. A permanent reminder of his crime, a warning to anyone else who might consider betrayal. That was the price of poisoning your best friend in Bumpy Johnson's world. Not quick death, not mercy, but 48 hours of suffering so complete that even hardened criminals refused to speak about the details. Bobby Jackson learned that lesson, 1 hour at a time, for 48 hours, until Bumpy finally let him die. And everyone in Harlem learned it by seeing what happened when you betrayed the one person you should never betray.